Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, very nice introduction. And yeah, congrats to Dorcas and nice to see colleagues I've been working with now for a little bit. I think some of you could probably lead this presentation. So I really look forward to hearing your comments and your additions during the discussion section. Uh, I spent a little bit of time on the Interfaces website and checked out what you all are doing, which looks really exciting. A lot looks very similar to some of the work that we do. Yeah, and so this presentation will focus mostly on gender and basic concepts around gender and agriculture that I hope you find helpful as you go through your work. And then we'll talk about a specific tool, GenderUp, and perhaps in the discussion, we can bring in more of the equity principles, which is a paper I recently published with a group of colleagues that speak about how, from an institutional or organizational perspective, we can be more inclusive and therefore be more effective, as well as the breaking biases, which again speaks to how can we be self-reflective and how our own systems might be causing us to not be as good at our jobs as we could be if we were more inclusive along the way and really thought through who is at the decision-making table, et cetera. But for now, I'll jump right into it. First, with a little bit about myself and the Feed the Future Innovation Lab, and then those basic concepts I mentioned, and then GenderUp. So, I'm Erin McGuire. I'm the director of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Horticulture. I would say my biophysical home is definitely in fruits and vegetables. We work a ton with African indigenous vegetables and ensuring that through fruits and vegetables, we're empowering small scale holders globally. So, the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Horticulture is a part of a larger Feed the Future Innovation Lab network, which is funded by the US government as a part of Feed the Future, which historically has been the US's response to hunger and malnutrition worldwide. And there's usually about 20 different innovation labs going at any different time. They're most often based at US universities, and they each have a different theme. So some of the Feed the Future Innovation Labs focus on maize or soybean, or different parts of the value chain, like post-harvest or integrated pest management. We, of course, focus on horticulture, which is an incredibly broad scope. Not only is horticulture, for some reason, treated like one crop, but it's hundreds, if not thousands, of crops that are edible that we work on. We also span the spectrum of biophysical and social sciences. So we really look on the supply side, looking at questions around soil health, post-harvest loss, innovations that can help and productivity, et cetera. But then we also do a lot of work on the social sciences. So working on how markets can empower women, how to get more nutrition sensitive agriculture, et cetera. And it's based at the University of California, Davis, where we have had the program now off and on for about 15 years. You can see here the regions in which we work. We have something that is really important to us in this round of funding. So this is the third round of funding that we've received from USAID, is that we have a local-led approach. And so here you can see our regional directors, where they sit. For Central America, Zamorano University leads our research portfolio in Central America. In West Africa, University of Ghana, and East Africa, the International Center for Evaluation and Development. And in South Asia, we have for Nepal. So essentially, we get funding from USAID, and then we act as a manager of those funds to distribute towards this goal, which is, our vision is our global research network advances horticulture and promotes local leadership to empower smallholder farmers. And you can see this sort of local-led, globally supported approach broken out here. I won't go too far into it because this isn't the point of the presentation, but it is one way in which we really feel like we're doing better research, which is by funding principal investigators directly in the regions where we're doing the research. which somehow is very novel. For USAID, almost always traditionally the funding goes to a US-based PI who then works with in-country implementers or partners, but not as leaders necessarily to do this research. So now 93% of our funding goes to locally based principal investigators. And it's a great honor to give this presentation about Feed the Future Innovation Labs, because who knows how much longer I will be able to give that intro given our current administration. So just a lot of gratitude for that, for what we do and what we've been able to do for many years. So horticulture, well, that's my biophysical home. I very much focus on gender and inclusivity as a part of my social science home, and really think very deeply about how we can be most effective as agriculture research or development actors by considering social goals. So I like to begin just by centering the conversation about what we are trying to do as agriculture research for development actors, which I would consider myself. In general, I would say agriculture research for development actors span all the way from big funders like GIZ, FAO, implementers based in West and East Africa, researchers like you all. It's quite a large ecosystem, but most of us are aiming towards sustainable development goals as agriculture research for development actors. And here are some of the most prominent sustainable development goals around reducing poverty, reducing inequality, and achieving gender equality. So what I want to point out here is that these are social goals, and very often we are using agricultural innovation in order to achieve social goals. So by not considering the social aspects of our innovations, we're really missing an important step in being effective with our agricultural innovations in order to achieve these goals. So this is just from one of my papers. I mean, something I work on very specifically is how we scale innovation in order to be effective. So this is just to center us around what the scaling process looks like. We have something in the external environment that we want to change, and so we bring in an innovation. And then through a scaling process, we increase the use of that innovation. And through the use of the innovation, we see an impact somehow in the external environment. But these are very much interacting with each other all the time. It's not a linear process where X goes into Y and then you see Z. They are always informing one another, changing the external environment, changing the scaling process, et cetera. And here where these stars are that I've put in this infographic is where I think we can think much more intentionally about social consideration. So when you consider the innovation and through all of your scaling processes. What often happens when agriculture research for development actors go to scale an innovation, they almost always have, it's almost always a much that linear thought process, which we know isn't actually how things happen, where they have their core innovation, a team's been working on this innovation for a long time, and so they put it into the field to start to scale it or to put it to use. And they think that the innovation will affect different groups of people or benefit different groups of people equally. And what you can see on the left-hand side is that an innovation might benefit some groups of people and might not benefit other groups of people. And what we're really working towards with the whole gender, responsible scaling, responsible innovation literature movement is what we see on the right-hand side, where we have a core innovation, but we're thinking about what the supporting innovations, the complementary innovations, the package of innovations can be in order to meet different groups of people's challenges and opportunities. And what I would really love to move towards as a agriculture research and development community and innovation systems is how do we build inclusive core innovation from the very beginning? So when we have a challenge, we know what group of people we want to affect through an innovation, and we build that innovation or curate our innovation in order to directly meet the needs of that group of people instead of sort of throwing it out as a free-for-all and hoping that it trickles down to the populations that we want to benefit. So really being intentional in our innovations. But because we don't do that, we often see negative impacts of innovation and scaling. So that the better off benefit at the expense of the poor, and we aggravate inequality. Women do not benefit as much as men. We see the expansive of intensive commercial agriculture, and non-users have their livelihoods displaced. One thing that we very often forget about, or a group of people we very often forget about, are the non-users. So while we put an innovation out there and we sort of just think about the people who will now be using the innovation, there's a whole system that was in place benefiting another group of people who might be displaced by your innovation. So that's just about innovation and scaling, kind of the framing of these concepts and why gender and agriculture matters. Uh, and again, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all. I know that many of you here have been working in gender and agriculture for a long time. But just to cover our bases here, we know that globally, 43% of agriculture workers are women, and in developing regions, the percentage is even higher. And I think it's also pretty commonly known at this point that even more women are engaging in agriculture and farming activities than they would personally report. Many times, people will report that women aren't doing agricultural activities when women absolutely are. Agriculture is one of the most important sources of employment, and women play a diverse role in food systems, farmers, entrepreneurs, post-harvest processors, etc. So what is gender? Um, Another slide, maybe I won't be able to present for much longer, but gender is how being a man or woman is constructed socially in a community. It's about the roles and behavior and what the community sort of dictates that being a man or woman might mean within the cultural setting. So generally we think of sex, like female and male is your biological assignment, and then gender is sort of your cultural assignment. And it influences your individual power, your opportunities and restrictions, and how women and men communicate and interact, which very much tracks with what you want to consider it might be important when scaling an innovation. So just to break that down a little bit, and by the way, these slides are from GenderUp. So if you get the opportunity to take GenderUp, which I will talk a little bit more later, you will go over these a little bit more detailed. So power over is associated with force, coercion, pressure, and then power with is building collective strength based on mutual support, solidarity. And then the power to is around autonomy or agency, the potential to make the ability to make decisions for yourself. And I would say, in many different ways, these types of power come into play for different innovations and scaling of innovations. But very often we see the lack of ability to make a decision to be incredibly impactful for whether or not someone is going to adopt an innovation, as you might imagine. So really being able to get to the core of someone being able to make a decision for themselves is really important. And so you see more and more programs and educational materials that go along with innovations or innovation training materials or farmer field schools that try to get at this agency issue to complement scaling of an innovation. So when considering power in a cultural setting, it can be invisible and complex. Women are often marginalized, and gender blind scaling reinforces the marginalization of women. So basically, that means if you're not considering women or other differences within a social group, you're essentially reinforcing the inequities within that group because you're scaling something with using the tools of the system at hand. So if you want to change those dynamics, you really have to consider specifically how low-income women might interact with your innovation, or how educated women might interact. So being really specific about who you are scaling that innovation for is important. So, in the literature, as I've discussed a bit about autonomy and some of these other power issues, it often comes up that women are less likely to innovate or adopt innovation. So perhaps you can start thinking in the back of your mind, why might women be less likely to adopt or benefit from an innovation? And perhaps you can think about it for the work you've been doing. But I'll give you a pretty significant insight into it right now. So some constraints that come up pretty strongly, and you can read about these more in depth in one of the papers I highlight in this talk. It'll come up in a second. Um, but women have limited access to resources, capital, land, credit. They have, as I mentioned, lack of decision-making power, market access, social norms of accepted behavior. So, of course, sort of these power concepts are woven all through this, and labor and time. Often, I don't know if anyone here has done a labor map or time map with women and men before. I'd love to hear if you have in our discussion. But very often, when you ask men and women to compare their days and write down the labor that they do and how they spend their days side by side, you'll see that a woman's day is 90% filled during her waking hours of work. And there's much more leisure time from a man on a man's sort of daily 24-hour map. And so when we think about how to, if you're going to bring an innovation into play, really thinking about whether or not a woman has time for the training, if that's really going to save her time overall, etc. So, given this, and again, just to start you thinking, why might women and men farmers have different needs and preferences for technology? So if you consider sort of these constraints that a woman might face over a man, how might you think about their challenge and opportunity landscape when you think about the innovations or research that you're doing? And hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that in our discussion. And all of this is really unpacked in these two papers, which I won't dwell on. But if you want to read more, this is a paper specifically sort of all the concepts that go into GenderUp, which I'll talk about lastly. Um, anticipating social differentiation and unintended consequences and scaling initiatives using GenderUp, a method to support responsible scaling. I guess we could have maybe come up with a better title there, but lots of good info and resources there. And then anticipating gender impacts and scaling innovations for agriculture, insights from the literature. So really it's in this paper that we get a lot of insight into how we can be more effective, or when things go wrong, scaling innovation. So finally today, I'm going to talk about GenderUp. So GenderUp was created really because of this situation that I mentioned earlier. We have agriculture research or development teams, researchers, innovators developing innovation and really not considering sometimes at all how those innovations are going to affect women or men, or an intersectionality of women and men once it is released into the place it's supposed to be used. And additionally, as the agriculture research development community gets more and more into scaling as a means of impact, those scaling activities are very much subject to cultural norms, social norms, and gender and social differences. And while the community has a lot of scaling tools for agriculture research or development actors, None of the tools, when this was created, considered gender or social differences at all. So this is really a first step to get innovation teams to consider gender and social differences and ultimately be more effective as we aim towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So, what is GenderUp? It's a discussion-based conversational method. It supports innovation teams to scale agricultural innovations, and it's gender responsive, socially inclusive, and responsible in this scaling plan that we are developing. And it's all to ultimately have more equitable access to the benefits of innovation that we're pushing out through our agricultural innovation systems. And GenderUp was created first funded by the CGIR with a grant to Wageningen University and University of California, Davis, of course, where I'm based, has now headed up a lot of that work. GenderUp is about a day-long training to become a facilitator. And then the core GenderUp methodology is meant to be work with agriculture research and development actors, innovation teams that have an innovation, and then you're walked through these 5 steps over again about the course of a day, but you can split it up into multiple workshops. So we generally suggest that if you're going to do a GenderUp workshop, it's about 3 hours, 3 days. So the first step in GenderUp is defining the scaling ambition. So we lay out the current scaling strategy and begin to identify where adjustments may need to be made. So the innovation team might already have a general sense of their scaling strategy. So we put it all out there to start as a baseline. And then we start exploring relevant diversity. So exploring dimensions of diversity. So it can be gender, wealth status, age. There's a long list of different aspects of diversity dimensions that we have in GenderUp. And then we start to understand the intersectionality. I mean, this intersectionality is a huge deal. And because people have such a difficult time with even being inclusive of gender as a term, the next step of intersectionality, which is really crucial, is very difficult to get to. And so GenderUp really tries in a very soft manner to lead people who are not gender scientists, might be more technical on the biophysical side, through a process of understanding what dimensions of diversity and how they intersect will affect someone's ability to use the innovation and or benefit from it. And then once we have that user profile on who might be most vulnerable to not benefiting from your innovation, then we can revisit the scaling strategy that the innovation team originally came up with and amend it to be sure that you're reaching these at-risk populations. And then finally, we go through a process of integrating GenderUp into the already established work plans. And so finally here, I think this is my one more slide after this. GenderUp works through short learning activities, interactive team discussions, and personal reflections or personal thought processes through surveys. So the learning activities and the discussion models really help the team along the way become more informed about gender issues or gender opportunities, intersectionality, all of these terms that maybe we are more familiar with are explained in a lighter way throughout the GenderUp process. So it is definitely meant to create a certain outcome, which is an inclusive scaling strategy at the end of your workshop, but it is also a capacity strengthening tool as well. So finally, this is actually even a little bit old. GenderUp is now being used globally. We have over 100 certified GenderUp facilitators, including those on the call. Innovation teams are using it all over in many of the regions where you all are working. And we are seeing sort of more off-brand uses of GenderUp as well, which is really exciting. People applying it into their own institutional setting. And we do have a training coming up, but I think it's at capacity. So if you're interested in becoming a GenderUp facilitator or learning more, you can, I'll put it into the chat, but it's genderup.ucdavis.edu. So you can register your interest there, and then our next training, we will send a note out to you. So that's in a nutshell. Because of the limited time, I didn't go too much into the equity principles or breaking biases, which I think might have been sent out to you, but I'm happy to answer questions or we can have a discussion about those papers. But yeah, I'll stop there and looking forward to hearing what you think and your own reflections in some of this.